All right, free spirits, welcome back to another episode of the Flying Upstream podcast. On today's episode, we are talking sales and leadership with Patrick DuBois. Patrick, did I say that correctly?
Very good. I like how you enunciate that at the end too. Perfect.
Perfect. Patrick is a sales expert and leadership strategist who has spent over 2 decades mastering the art of driving growth and coaching winning teams. Patrick has been recognized with multiple national sales awards, led regional teams to top performance rankings, and developed success sales training programs. He has been featured as a speaker, and today his social media presence is focused on providing sales insights, leadership strategies, and practical coaching tips, primarily through his LinkedIn and his Sales Edge newsletter, also on LinkedIn. Patrick, welcome to Flying Upstream.
It's great to be here, Luisa. Thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful. I already apologized to you, but I will apologize to anyone who's listening. It sounds like it was just one of my dogs that wouldn't stop, but it sounds like there may be two now who want to be a part of the show today.
Yeah, they're jealous. They're thinking, like, I want to talk. I want some screen time. Come on.
That's right. So, Patrick, I want to learn more about you because what you do is really exciting to me. One of the things that I read about you in preparing for this episode is that you actually were skeptical of salespeople yourself, and you saw them
Totally.
as unauthentic. Tell me more about that. What was the turning point? What happened there?
Oh man, I was working at a veterinary hospital and as a technician, and we had the sales rep come in from a major manufacturer and give us a presentation on their product. And I was so I was so turned off from that. I was like, oh my God, yeah, they're fake. They weren't really interacting with us. They weren't really listening to what we wanted to hear. They weren't, you know, and that was my very first time with that. And I was like, I was um, working at a veterinary hospital, going to school, going to college, and eventually I wanted to be a veterinarian. That was kind of like the goal. So this was early on in my career, not even in sales yet. And so from that point on, I'm thinking like I really don't like that industry. I really wasn't going to go there necessarily. And then obviously today, which is ironic because here I am. So I think part of it was just learning that not everyone um, has some of the strengths that I look for in what I want to be sold to. So there's plenty of those people out there. I'm sure your audience and everyone can relate that there's sometimes when we're talking to people, think like, I don't really like this approach, or I don't really like to be sold. So I just learned early on that if I ever got in the position, I would not do that. And then I ended up getting an opportunity to go into sales, and so then that's when I started like, well, I'm going to do it differently. I am going to relate to the people, ask them questions, and do more things like that than just try to pull through my detail piece and all that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that you shared that coming from a salesperson because I will literally like poke through, through like my blinds when I see someone at the door that may look like a salesperson. And I think that,
Yeah.
in general, a lot of us do have kind of that like idea. Like it feels inauthentic. I remember recently there was like internet people, they were trying to sell me internet that came to the house. And I actually ended up buying, and I would love to get your insight on this because I actually don't usually open the door at all. But there was
Oh,
something about the way they were presenting themselves. And when I opened the door, there was this warmth, and I didn't feel like they were here to sell me something. There was a connection. I don't know what that was.
mm,
Is there something about like the non-verbal communication in sales that can kind of come across more authentic than otherwise?
totally. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's when you have an immediate connection with somebody, I always feel like you're sharing the values. So whatever it was, you're automatically on the same level. Like, I like this person, like right away. Right. And so, I mean, if you boil it all down to, Louisa, most of us just buy from people we like.
Mm.
And so then the question is, well, how do I be more likable? And I always say, well, then just be yourself. Don't try to be someone you're not. And that's really difficult really difficult to do. Easy to say. The other thing I think you're picking up on the body language. you can see all the different numbers that are out there. Anywhere from 67% is communication is through body language. So just me and you having like that max headroom screen, you really can't see the rest of my body, which is how we are in virtual land. But there's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of things you can pick up on people's tone, how they use their hands, what their facial expressions are. All those things are kind of built into it. So I also think some people are intuitive, or they kind of feel like they can absorb the people's energy coming up to, not to get too woo,
Yeah.
but I think that's part of it. And so if you're feeling like this person coming up is a match, quote unquote, for you, then you'll listen to what they say. If they're coming up and you're thinking like, I don't know about this guy or girl, I don't know what they're gonna be like. And it's if you think about the other side of it too, for the salesperson, it's like the worst. You feel like they don't like me, or they're not gonna even talk to me, or in your case, they're not even gonna open the door. And it feels like so there's a frustration on both sides of that table too. So I always like to tell people, when you're a salesperson, realizing that the other person over there is just like you, they're just on the other side. So how do you like to be sold to? What kind of conversations do you like? Then have that.
That's so
Hope that answers.
powerful. It's so simple, like simple words said, but so powerful. I feel like
Yeah.
what I take away from what you said is being yourself and being authentic is essentially what's going to make you successful in selling. But what are like some of the first steps that someone can take to discover how to do that? Because, like we said, it sounds simple, but I think it can be hard if you're not really in touch with yourself. It sounds like something that might be a little bit more difficult to do.
Yeah, there's so many layers to that question. Um, I typically like to start with understanding who you are as a person, and that means really looking at your strengths. And you don't have to get too personal about it. It's just more of, there's a lot of psychological tests out there that I like, that I found personally very helpful. So whether it's DISC or Myers Briggs, or I really like the Strength Finders book, Tom Clifton, because it actually has really good wording in there that I can use for myself anyway, that really describes who I am in more specific areas. So, like for example, one of my top strength is called maximizer. And that's a word that they use, but you could kind of look through and see the description of it. And my top strength is figuring out what other people's strengths are in a very short amount of time. And then I look to figure out how I can actually put them in a position, or how do I communicate with them, because I know this is their strength, and I know I can talk the language pretty quickly. So for me, when you're either a new salesperson or one who's been around for a while, if you walk into an office setting or services, or you're talking to someone and your strengths cold, and you feel so confident, like, listen, I need to get myself in this position because that's when I slay it. You're going to have so much confidence about who you are and what you do, and you're not going to worry about all the things like, I'm not this, or I'm prepare well, or whatever it is that you're worrying about. Just focus on what you do really well. And I always think that's where I start with everybody, is tell me your strengths. In fact, when I do interviews, I ask people, so what are your top 5 strengths? And some people know it. And then I reverse a little bit and said, okay, that's great. So if I asked your family or friends, or your husband, wife, what would they tell me your top 5 strengths are? And it's really cool that they can switch. Oh, well, my friends tell me this, and so all of a sudden there's like this different language they're talking about that. And so I can kind of feel like, oh, okay, they professionally they think this is that, but when they strip it away and their friends talk about it, like, Patrick, he's so funny, or he's got a great sense of humor, he's so loving, or whatever else they'll tell about me. That's like where we get down to, that's your strength. That's what you really do well.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Have you found long term the strengths that they share that are coming from the perspective of like their family and friends to be more true than the ones that they're saying are true professionally?
Sometimes, and sometimes they say the same things. I think because I've been doing it for so long, I can kind of read between the lines that, they're trying to be their best. When you're interviewing someone, not to get off too off track, but this is the best that you're going to see of them, right? And so they're nervous and they're trying to answer the questions and be polished and all that stuff too. And so, many times in that process, if I can kind of relax them a little bit, or I make fun of myself, self-deprecating humor sometimes is a very effective way to, to calm everybody's nerves down a little bit. So I typically will make fun of myself or whatever it is I do. I'm so silly. Um, but to answer your question, sometimes they'll have a couple things that they'll say that are the same. And most of the time I can kind of figure out like that's probably where they would start at. But I can also tell, extrovert, introvert, you can kind of split people apart that way too. You can talk about if what their tone is and some of the body languages I can kind of tell. And, I I love that part of it because it's a bit of a game overall. I think about it, and sales to me is so much fun because there's so many different layers. And I teach about the 8 cycles of sales cycle, right? You start from the beginning and you go all the way around. And I love each section of that because it's so fun from an interactive standpoint.
That's amazing. And what in that process, that 8 cycles that you teach about, is that something that you've developed with your 2+ decades of experience, or is that something that's more generally known in the sales world?
I mean, generally known in the sales world of a sales cycle, and you can look that up on Google and you can get a lot of information about it. I put in mine things that I've learned along the way, tips and tricks to really help where I struggled. Because remember, Luisa, I didn't really like sales, and so I had to kind of learn from the ground up. And yes, over time, I took courses and I did leaderships things, and I was taught different ways, and we were given so many darn books to read, and everyone had their own slant about how to do sales. So I kind of cherry picked what kind of worked for me. And then when I do it now, I say, this is Patrick's world. This is what I think is important. And it's just different. That's all. And so I think there's certain areas in the sales process that I've learned that has helped me. And if I can help somebody else during that process, then it's really beneficial.
That's amazing. And talking about, you and what you've developed and your years of experience, what do you think are 2 or 3 of the most overlooked skills in the sales process that people think, for the people who may be thinking, oh, I'm not good at sales, or I'm not going to be good at sales, that's just not my thing, sort of like where you were at the beginning of all this. What are
Yeah.
like some skills that maybe a lot of us have that could make us great salespeople that we're not thinking about?
Yeah. Honestly, I think everyone's great in sales because you have to be. In one form or another. If you look at your life, and even if you're not in classically a sales position, if you have children, you're negotiating with your children all the time, and they're selling you, you're selling them. There's all that going on. And if you don't think you're not, then I just don't believe that. When you're going to buy something yourself, you're talking to your spouse, or you're having to make the decision: is it pizza, or are we going to do like salad tonight? You're selling all the time, I think. So everyone thinks like, oh, sales is difficult, and you're right, because there is a portion of sales when you have a quota or you have a metrics or KPI or something that you have to hit. There's a lot of pressure behind that. And you live and die as a salesperson by your numbers, right? That's an old adage. And so I think that's where people can come into it and get a little scared or frightened because they're not used to that type of pressure. They just want to do their job and whatever that job is. So if you look at sales overall as a pie, think of it this way, and you're coming into it, and I think everyone has a natural gift. That's why you're on this planet for one reason or the other. And so for when I work with clients, my job is to kind of pull that out from them and find out what that is. But you can do it on your own too. And you can just ask your family and friends, like I said in the interview questions, or you can read some books or do some psychological stuff to find out what those strengths are. But if you're a creative person, for example, let's say you're a designer, and you really do really good product and stuff, and then you think, well, I really like to show other people this, or maybe that's my business. Maybe I have to go out and talk to other people about my designs and see if they like it. Well, you're selling it. You're going to sell the designs. You may not be classically quote unquote trained in that, but I think everyone has the ability to sell. So someone coming new to the industry or to whatever it is in sales overall, I think you're already selling. You just have to feel like you're comfortable with what you do really well. And and that can be a lifetime of work to figure that out. And everyone has like they do this career for so long and then they get to a certain level and they go, heck with that. I'm gonna do what I really want to do. And then we're thinking, okay, now it's game on because now it's kind of fun.
I love that.
So to answer your question, people can understanding that that's the first thing you can do is know who you are, and then the rest of it is an adventure.
That's amazing. Do you think some people are able to sort of find who they are in sort of at the same time as they develop their sales career, like as they develop themselves as a salesperson?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, look at me, dude. You know, I'm the quintessential like petri dish because I started off one way, thinking I had to do something, and then I kind of played around with it. And as we call it a single contributor, someone who actually is on the front line selling it, I didn't have anyone reporting to me. I learned early on just what I did naturally well, and I can relate to people. Like I said, I can understand them. I make fun of myself. I have some humor involved. I can kind of relate with them. It's not always so serious, some of the stuff. But the interesting thing for me is then I got an opportunity to be a leader of people. And so if you think about this from sports analogy, or if you want to use something else, but like basketball, some of the greatest basketball players don't make great coaches. So the thinking is that we promote some of our top salespeople into leadership roles, but they may not be very good leaders. And I had to learn that lesson pretty early on too. Is that when I got to leadership, I thought everyone was doing the same thing that I was doing, like going out and I was ranked in number ones. I was doing all this stuff, and I looked around at my team, I'm thinking like, well, what are you guys doing? And they're not all built like you. So I had to learn that quite a bit as a leader, that not everyone's like me. I can do it like me. And then I learned the lesson like, no, they can't all be mini me's and go do it. Everyone has their own personality and their traits. And that's when I really like, oh. So if you were on my sales team, Luisa, then I would say, well, what is your strength? What do you do really well? You're not going to be me, because I've tried that. I've tried to be someone who's just as successful as me and do their style. Man, I did terrible. I flamed out. I got people mad at me because it wasn't who I was.
Yeah.
So lots of lessons along the way in sales for sure. And when you get to managing people, then it's a whole different game, probably a whole different, podcast we can talk about.
Yes, I totally agree. It sounds like that's the authenticity part and like sort of identifying your superpower, right? Like what makes you you, and then honing in on that and having someone, who is a coach, who is a manager, who has those different set of skills to kind of help you drill that in and sort of perfect that in a way, even though I'm not sure that perfection is the word we want to use there.
Yeah, dangerous.
Yes, danger zone, absolutely. So you mentioned like traditional approach, and this podcast is all about the unconventional, about what's different. So I'd love to know what sets your sales approach apart from a traditional sales method, and how can someone who may be listening apply that to be able to stand out in competitive markets?
Well, I think I've been saying it. I don't want to hit everyone over the head too many times, but once you figure out what your strengths are, then you can realize, how do I put myself in those positions to win in any environment, knowing what I do really well. So like I said earlier, if I'm a maximizer, I really like to take people and really, as the analogy would be of an oyster, and there's a little bit of sand, and I really like to work with that little kernel to make it more the oyster, right? The beautiful part of it. So for me, I love working with individuals and really figuring out what they do really well. And then I have to decide, is it some of their challenges, the things that they don't do really well, is that mission critical for the role or not? And if it is, then we kind of work on it. But it's not, I really don't worry about it, because I'm going to use their strengths and maximizing their strengths, putting them in really good positions to win. So if someone's a really good, strong closer as a let's say a skill set, they may struggle with listening because they always want to get to the close because they love that part of it. They want to win. They want to, they want to get that sale. And so they may overlook some of the beginning parts of the sales cycle, which is really listening to the customer because they want to get to what they want to sell. So many times I can put them in a position where they go, oh, you have to pull back and know that you're going to get this sale. Regardless, you're going to ask for the business. You know that about yourself. So let's pretend during this process, we're just going to lay back in the weeds a little bit and then just talk to the person a little about what do they do, what their product is, how it can help, what is the service. And then once you get to the point of, where you're going to get to the closing part, then you can kind of say, okay, I can go into that because you have really good confidence in that. So it's a bit of like I said, it's a bit of a game. Once you figure out what your confidence or what your skill sets are, that it's really strong, then you have to balance it with what don't you do really well within that sales process. And my experience has been, you don't have all of them, unfortunately. It's like the unicorn. I wish we could all have all stages of the sales cycle cold, like a 5, but we don't. So you have to realize that where areas that you have some challenges in, and where can you work on those within that, but knowing that you're going to get to your strengths eventually. So I don't know if that answered the question, but. Oh, you're on mute. You're doing a good job trying to keep your dog.
Yes, I want to be able to hear you. I want our listeners to hear you. But okay, so yes, you definitely did answer my question. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I have a question about, you mentioned like, when somebody's good at like closing, doing different aspects of the sales process. I actually have 2 questions that I'm eager to ask you. I'll start with the first one is, do you, in your experience, is there a difference in how successful any salesperson could be depending on the product they're trying to sell? Does their authenticity matter always, or is it based on what they're trying to sell?
Well, intuitively, I think you should be able to connect with the product or the services right away. Because if you don't believe in it, and you're trying to sell something you don't believe, you can read right through that stuff, right? And so I've been there where I had to sell a product I didn't really believe in, or a program that I was like, oh, I'm being asked to do this and I'm going to get, bonused or accolades for doing all these things. I was like, well, is it really in the best interest of my client or the customer? But yeah, if I do a bunch of those and I get a reward, and so you kind of have to balance it. And sometimes this can be pretty awkward. So yeah, if you live long enough and go through those, you're realizing they don't really mean a hill of beans to make those deals necessarily, because you may lose that customer. And I have had that experience where I lost a customer because I was so jacked up about this program and I was selling it to everybody, and I just wasn't listening to my customer. And they're like, hey, next time you come in, you can't see us. It's like, well, what happened? I'm like, well, we don't know who that last Patrick was, but we want the old one that came in before because we liked him better. And I was like, oh gosh. So I learned a valuable lesson that day to really understand, like, even though I have an agenda, that you can lose them. So if you don't like the product or the services you're selling, you can probably it's going to eat at you, and your customers can see it. And the other part is, I work with some individuals and companies whose sales are down, and they want me to come in to fix it. And I have to look at the personnel and say, okay, show me your talent, who's got what and what do they like and all that. And sometimes meeting with them, they're not locked and loaded with the product or the services that they got hired to do. And so, I have to tread lightly here, because I would say, well, this probably is not a position for you to be at. Something else, because you're selling a product or services you don't really like and kind of get behind, or you don't like the company or the management and all that. And man, those are dangerous waters. And I think life's too short. Go get something you really love to do, or go after a product you really love to do and sell the heck out of it and be like, oh, thank God I can do this now. Right?
Yes, I totally agree with you. I personally, and in every aspect of my life, I am at a point where it's like life is too short. If it's not in alignment with me, in full alignment with my values, with who I am, with how I want to spend my time around the energy that I want to spend my time around, then it's really not for me and it's time to move forward. But I do think that unless you are, you know, that in touch with yourself, it can be hard to identify. And I want to kind of pivot a little. And as I know we're running out of time here, but I do want to ask a question about sales because one of the things when I've thought about sales in the past myself, one of the biggest things has been thinking about the rejection. And it's inevitable, right? It's part of the growth that comes with being a salesperson. What mindset shifts do you teach? What practices or what ideas do you help your customers and the people that you work with um, so that they can overcome the setbacks that come from the rejections that may come over and over and over again until we learn to get it right and we learn to be in alignment as a salesperson?
Yeah. So a great question. I think honoring yourself that there are times, excuse me, when you are going to get rejected or no's. And I think you can read and people will say there's so many no's before a yes. And, all that's great. And I don't want to, belittle that necessarily. But in my experience, no's suck, right? Let's be honest. They don't feel good. It feels like, I thought we had a good thing here, or what happened? And so I teach quite a bit, or I coach quite a bit about if you get a no, what does that mean? And some of the vernacular that you can use is no is not necessarily a no, it just means not now. So
Mhm.
that's helped me in my sales overall. It just means not now. And it could be other things going on with that person or the company or whatever it is that's in play that has nothing to do with you, right? There's other things involved in it. So if you look at it from that standpoint, you didn't get the sale today. There's other things going on involved. It may not necessarily be you, because we always think about, oh, it's all about me. It's like, well, why didn't they like me and my product and stuff? Sometimes it's not about you. So
Yes.
I've learned that, and I just had to take a step back. I do it now, where I go like, "Gosh, what happened? I thought this was a good conversation, or I thought we were going to go places and do things, and it just didn't happen for some reason." And so there are some things I've learned along the way that you can help with no's or rejection, if you want to call it that, where you kind of go back in the sales cycle and you figure out like, well, what happened? Because somewhere along the way you lost them, right?
Mhm.
And meaning that they were at one point interested in you, and then something happened. Um, so I have learned to ask the customer directly and say, like, "Hey, Luisa, I thought we were talking pretty good, and it seems like you're interested in this product or the services or whatever. But I noticed that you're kind of losing interest in it. So can you tell me what you're feeling about it?" And just kind of leave it open like that. And then most of the time people go like, "Well, what? Oh no, Patrick. I mean, we're fine," and all this stuff too. But I know that I've lost you, so I have to ask another questions like, "Well, okay, I'd really love for you to come on board or have our product or whatever you're saying to them. Is that something you want to move forward with, or would this provide value to you or to your company or to your store?" And see what they say. Because I've learned most of the time people are like, "Listen, I can't afford it right now," or "Yeah, I really wanted it, but I really have to think about it." And I always think, well, what does that mean? Think about it. Did I not provide enough value to you? So I really want them just to be honest and say, "Listen, dude, I can't do it today. I really love your stuff." And say, "Great." And that's fine because we all say that. I want to live to fight another day. So I always say, "Well, I'd love to follow up with you. What's a good timeline for you on this?" And at least walk out the door with a commitment for a timeline. Say, "Okay, great." So if you say, "Hey, Patrick, maybe call me back in a couple weeks." So say, "Great. I'm going to make a note. I'm going to call you on Thursday, and we can review this." And at least I have something else I can come back to that. And that's one part of the no part solve sometimes, but you will, and it may ghost you. They may say like, I'm not buying it, or they won't answer your phone calls. So it's just kind of part of it sometimes. And it could be not a good match either. Had plenty of those myself where it's just not a good match, and we just kind of move on.
Yeah. I love that you share that sometimes it's not a good match. I like to think of no's in general, big picture, as, sort of redirection. And some of what you shared kind of aligns with that, where it's like, okay, what, go back in the sales cycle and where did I lose you, and kind of gathering that feedback so that in the next phase of, whenever you have a new client or whenever you're selling a new product or whatever the next step is for you, and in that sales process, you have more information to kind of grow from. So I really, really appreciate that. It sounds like the work that you do, honestly, it's amazing, right? There's nothing that we do in this life, like you started saying, that does not involve sales. I mean, I have 2 children, and negotiation is a must to keep things flowing around here.
Exactly. Yeah, and those 2 or 3-year-olds can be tough negotiators. Man, I get it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap up? I've been so grateful. I feel like I've learned so much and had such a great
Oh,
time chatting with you.
thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Well, I think if someone's interested in looking at my services, they can go to the Sales Growth Today website. My contact information is on there. You can also go to my LinkedIn. I have another business as well too with a winery, so I live and breathe the sales on my own side too. So we can chat about that if you want. But I love to just get in conversation with people and see where their needs are, and then if they need some directions with how to define, who they are. I really love that initial conversation too. That I offer at least an opportunity to talk about what their strengths are once they find out with them, and then just kind of riff back and forth about what does it mean, how do I apply it, where do I go with it. So I love some of those initial conversations too. So, and most of my initial calls are complimentary because I want to find out if it's a good match for me and you. So I would say book some time on my calendar and let's talk.
Wonderful. I love that. Thank you so much. And for listeners, all of Patrick's links are going to be in the show notes and in the YouTube description so that you can reach out to him. And Patrick, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. Thank you for being an authentic sales leader. I love that. And for you, free spirits, if you want to learn more about Patrick's unique approach and access his sales strategies, be sure to follow him on LinkedIn, like he shared. Subscribe to his newsletter on LinkedIn, Sales Edge newsletter, and also go to his website, book a call, and find all of those links in the description in the show notes. And until next time, as always, keep challenging, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep flying upstream.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
guys. See you
Thank
guys.
you.